The streets of Istanbul erupted. A wave of anger, raw and immediate, washed over Turkey. The arrest of Ekrem Imamoglu, the popular mayor of Istanbul, had struck a nerve. Imamoglu, a man of the people, was seen as a threat to the iron grip of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his ruling Justice and Development Party, or AKP. Imamoglu's crime? Insulting a public official. A flimsy pretext, many argued, for silencing a powerful voice of dissent. The people of Turkey weren't fooled. They knew a political witch hunt when they saw one. Imamoglu, after all, had already dealt Erdogan a stinging defeat in 2019, winning the Istanbul mayoralty in a stunning upset. The response was swift, defiant. Thousands poured into the streets chanting slogans, waving flags. They came from all walks of life: students, workers, artists, families. Their message was clear: enough is enough. Turkey, they insisted, would not be bullied into submission. This was not just about Imamoglu. It was about the soul of Turkey. It was about the erosion of democracy, the stifling of dissent, the relentless crackdown on freedom. Erdogan, the strongman who had dominated Turkish politics for 2 decades, remained unmoved. He dismissed the protests as a movement of violence, orchestrated by his political opponents. The opposition, he claimed, was intent on sowing chaos and undermining Turkey's stability. His words, however, rang hollow to many. They had heard it all before. Erdogan's playbook was familiar: discredit, demonize, and then crush any opposition. The independent media had been silenced, journalists jailed, critics intimidated. The judiciary, once a pillar of independence, had been brought to heel. Turkey, under Erdogan's rule, was sliding towards authoritarianism. The protests, however, presented a direct challenge to Erdogan's authority. They revealed the deep well of anger and frustration that had been building beneath the surface. The Turkish people, it seemed, were no longer willing to remain silent. They were demanding their voices be heard. Erdogan's response was predictable. He unleashed the full force of the state apparatus against the protesters. Tear gas, water cannons, and rubber bullets were used to disperse the crowds. Thousands were arrested, including journalists, activists, and opposition politicians. Through it all, Ekrem Imamoglu remained a potent symbol of resistance. Even from behind bars, his voice resonated. He urged his supporters to remain peaceful, to continue their struggle for democracy. His message was one of hope, of unity, of unwavering belief in the power of the people. Imamoglu's appeal transcended political divides. He represented a different kind of politics, one based on dialogue, inclusivity, and respect for the rule of law. He had shown that it was possible to challenge Erdogan's narrative, to offer an alternative vision for Turkey. The decision by the main opposition party, the Republican People's Party, or CHP, to nominate Imamoglu as their candidate for the 2028 presidential elections was a powerful statement of defiance. It sent a clear message that they would not be intimidated, that they would continue to fight for a democratic Turkey. The revocation of Imamoglu's university diploma, a prerequisite for holding public office, was widely seen as a blatant attempt to derail his candidacy. The move, however, backfired spectacularly. It only served to further galvanize the opposition and solidify Imamoglu's status as a symbol of resistance. The international community watched with growing alarm. Condemnations poured in from Western governments and human rights organizations. They denounced the arrest of Imamoglu, the crackdown on protesters, and the erosion of democratic norms in Turkey. The United States, while cautious in its criticism, expressed concern over the Turkish government's actions. The European Union, a longtime critic of Erdogan's human rights record, was more forceful in its condemnation. Germany, France, and other European countries called for the immediate release of Imamoglu and an end to the violence against protesters. The international response, however, seemed to have little impact on Erdogan. He remained defiant, accusing foreign powers of meddling in Turkey's internal affairs. The Turkish government, he insisted, was acting within its rights to maintain law and order. Section 5. Echoes of Gezi, a resurgence of resistance. The protests in many ways evoked memories of the Gezi Park protests of 2013. What began as a small demonstration against the demolition of a park in Istanbul had morphed into a nationwide movement against Erdogan's authoritarian rule. The Gezi protests, though brutally suppressed, had exposed the deep fissures in Turkish society and the growing discontent with Erdogan's rule. The current protests, while smaller in scale, carried similar echoes of defiance. They were a reminder that the spirit of Gezi, the yearning for democracy and freedom, had not been extinguished. It lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. The parallels were not lost on Erdogan. He had learned from Gezi, and he was determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. This time the crackdown was swifter, more brutal. The authorities were determined to prevent the protests from gaining momentum from spreading to other parts of the country. Section 6. The crumbling facade: journalism under siege in Turkey. The arrest of journalists covering the protests was a chilling reminder of the perilous state of press freedom in Turkey. Under Erdogan's rule, Turkey had become one of the world's leading jailers of journalists. Independent media outlets had been shut down, critical voices silenced. The government's control over the media was almost total. Propaganda and disinformation flourished, while independent voices were drowned out. The few remaining independent journalists operated under constant threat of arrest, harassment, and violence. The international community condemned the attacks on journalists, calling for their immediate release and an end to the intimidation of the press. The Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ, described the situation in Turkey as nothing short of a full-blown assault on press freedom. Section 7. A generation stands up. Defiance in the face of fear. Despite the risks, the protests continued. A new generation of Turks raised under Erdogan's rule was coming of age. They had known nothing but a Turkey where dissent was silenced, where the media was muzzled, where the judiciary was subservient to the executive. They were tired of living in fear. They were the ones on the front lines, facing down the water cannons and tear gas. They were the ones sharing videos and information on social media, circumventing the government's censorship. They were the ones demanding a better future for themselves and their country. Their courage was an inspiration. They were risking their freedom, their livelihoods, even their lives, to stand up for what they believed in. They were the hope for a more democratic Turkey. Section 8. The stakes could not be higher. A defining moment for Turkey. The protests represented a pivotal moment for Turkey. The country stood at a crossroads. One path led towards further authoritarianism, towards a future where dissent was crushed, where the rule of law was trampled, where fear and intimidation reigned supreme. The other path, though more uncertain, offered the promise of a more democratic future, a future where the rights of all citizens were respected, where the press was free, where the judiciary was independent. The choice facing Turkey was stark. The outcome was far from certain. The stakes, however, could not be higher. The future of Turkey as a democracy hung in the balance. The international community, too, had a role to play. Silence, in the face of such blatant assaults on democracy, was not an option. The world needed to stand with the people of Turkey to support their aspirations for a more democratic future. Section 9. The future remains unwritten. A glimmer of hope endures. The arrest of Ekrem Imamoglu and the subsequent protests had shaken Turkey to its core. They had exposed the fragility of Turkish democracy, the deep divisions within Turkish society, and the lengths to which Erdogan was willing to go to maintain his grip on power. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: the spirit of resistance was alive and well in Turkey. The Turkish people, despite facing relentless pressure, had shown that they were not afraid to raise their voices, to demand a better future for themselves and their children. The struggle for democracy in Turkey was far from over. It would be a long and arduous journey, fraught with challenges and setbacks. But the events of recent weeks had shown that hope, however flickering, remained alive. The fight for a free and democratic Turkey would continue.